The leather chair in Luke Harrison's corner office creaked as he leaned back, studying the document before him. 20 years of legal practice had taught him to read between the lines, to sense when something wasn't quite right. The divorce petition sitting on his mahogany desk carried his sister's name, Jessica Harrison Mitchell versus Paul Mitchell, but it was the allegations within that made his stomach turn. Domestic violence, he whispered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. His sister, his little sister Jess, the one he'd sworn to protect since they were kids, had been suffering in silence. The thought made his hands clench involuntarily. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Harrison, your sister is here." Luke straightened his tie, a nervous habit from his early courtroom days. "Send her in, Marie." Jessica entered, her presence a stark contrast to his memories of her. Gone was the vibrant woman who'd light up rooms with her laughter. Instead, she moved with a calculated precision, as if every step required forethought. Her designer outfit and perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite mask the shadows under her eyes. "Luke," she said, her voice steady but thin. "Thank you for seeing me." "Jess, why didn't you tell me sooner?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Professional distance be damned, this was his sister. She sank into the client chair, her composure cracking slightly. "Because it's Paul. Your best friend from law school. Our regular golf partner. The godfather to your son." Her laugh was hollow. "How exactly was I supposed to tell you?" Luke felt the weight of those roles crushing him. Paul Mitchell had been more than a friend, he'd been family. The man who'd stood beside him at his wedding, who'd helped carry their father's casket, who'd built a successful tech company from scratch while maintaining his everyman charm. "Tell me everything," Luke said, pulling out a legal pad. From the beginning. Jessica's story unfolded like a nightmare. The controlling behavior disguised as concern. The explosive anger masked as passion. The accidents that left bruises in places easily hidden by clothing. Each detail was a dagger in Luke's conscience. How had he missed the signs? "I have evidence," Jessica said, reaching for her phone. "Videos, photos, medical reports. I started documenting everything 6 months ago when I realized I needed a way out." Luke watched as she pulled up file after file, each one more damning than the last. His legal mind catalogued the evidence while his heart raged at the betrayal, both Paul's actions and his own blindness. "I'll take the case," he said finally. "But Jess, you need to understand something. Once we file this, there's no going back. Paul won't just roll over. He'll fight, and it'll get ugly." "I know," Jessica replied, a glimmer of her old strength showing through. "That's why I came to you. You're not just my brother, you're the best damn lawyer in the city. And I need both right now." The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Harrison, Mr. Mitchell is here. He's quite insistent about seeing you." Luke and Jessica exchanged looks. "I'll use the private exit," she said, gathering her things. I can't face him yet." As Jessica slipped out through the second door, Luke stood, straightening his suit jacket. The familiar weight of his role settled over him, advocate, protector, brother. But as Paul's footsteps approached, another role demanded attention, friend. The door opened, and Paul Mitchell entered with his usual confident stride. His tailored suit and winning smile were exactly as Luke remembered, but now he searched for cracks in the facade, for signs of the monster his sister described. "Luke, buddy," Paul said, arms open for an embrace. "We need to talk." Looking at his old friend, Luke felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, he realized that everything he thought he knew about loyalty, truth, and justice was about to be tested. Luke didn't return Paul's embrace. Instead, he gestured to the chair Jessica had occupied moments before, maintaining the professional barrier his desk provided. "Have a seat." Paul's smile faltered slightly as he settled into the leather chair. "Come on, Luke. Don't tell me you're buying into this. You know me. You know us, what Jessica and I have built together. What I know, Luke replied carefully, is that my sister has presented compelling evidence of systematic abuse. He kept his voice steady, though his pulse thundered in his ears. As her legal counsel, I have to take these allegations seriously. Legal counsel? Paul leaned forward, his carefully maintained composure cracking. We've known each other for 25 years. I was there when you met Sarah. I helped you pick out the ring. And now you're sitting there, looking at me like I'm some monster based on what? Some carefully crafted lies. Luke studied his friend's face, searching for truth in the familiar features. He'd seen Paul angry before, in heated courtroom battles, during tough business negotiations. But this was different. There was a desperation in his eyes that Luke had never witnessed. Show me your phone, Paul said suddenly, pulling out his own. I want you to see something. Dozens of text messages filled the screen. Messages from Jessica, spanning months. Sweet notes, loving exchanges, plans for their anniversary. The last one was from just 3 days ago, can't wait for dinner tonight. Love you always. Does this look like an abusive relationship to you? Paul's voice cracked. She's trying to destroy me, Luke. The company's about to go public. The IPO could be worth billions. And suddenly, conveniently, these accusations surface? Luke felt the ground shifting beneath his certainties. He thought of the evidence Jessica had shown him, the bruises, the medical reports. But Paul's words stirred uncomfortable questions. The timing was convenient. Too convenient. There's more, Paul continued, pulling out a folder. Financial records. Jessica's been moving money around, setting up offshore accounts. She started meeting with corporate raiders 3 months ago. She's not just after a divorce settlement, she wants control of the company. Luke's legal mind began cataloging the implications. If Paul was telling the truth, if Jessica had orchestrated this. But then he remembered the fear in his sister's eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movements. Why are you showing me this? Luke asked. You know I can't be objective. I'm her brother. Because you're also my friend, Paul replied. And because you're the most honest person I know. You've built your career on finding the truth, not just winning cases. I'm not asking you to abandon Jessica. I'm asking you to look deeper. Paul stood, straightening his jacket. There's a file at the office. Security footage from the days she claims I attacked her. I was in Singapore, Luke. The whole executive team can verify it. Check the timestamps on her photos. Talk to our household staff. Just, investigate before you destroy everything we've all built. As Paul moved toward the door, he paused. Remember that night in law school? When I found you drunk and ready to quit after that mock trial disaster? I told you then that integrity wasn't about being right, it was about finding the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. You've lived by that ever since. Don't stop now. The door closed behind Paul, leaving Luke alone with his turbulent thoughts. He reached for his phone, scrolling through years of family photos. Paul and Jessica at Christmas, at birthday parties, at charity galas. In every image, they looked like the perfect couple. But appearances could be deceiving, Luke knew that better than most. His computer chimed with an email notification. Jessica had sent over more documentation, hospital records, police reports filed but later withdrawn, statements from her therapist. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Yet Paul's words echoed in his mind, along with the weight of their shared history. Luke opened his bottom drawer, pulling out a framed photo from his law school graduation. There they were, he and Paul, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Jessica stood between them, her smile radiant, no hint of the darkness to come. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Harrison. Your wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent. Luke stared at the phone, knowing that whatever Sarah had to say would add another layer to this complex web. His sister or his friend? The truth or a carefully constructed lie? Justice or manipulation? The choices before him seemed impossible, each path leading to irreparable damage. He lifted the receiver, his voice rough. Sarah? What's wrong? Her response made his blood run cold. Luke, there's something you need to know about Jessica. Something I've been keeping secret for years. Sarah's revelation hung in the air of their kitchen that evening, heavy with implications. Luke sat at the counter, his untouched whiskey catching the soft light, as his wife paced before him. 3 years ago, I found Jessica in the guest bathroom during the Christmas party, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She was applying concealer to her collarbone. When I walked in, she couldn't hide the bruises fast enough. Luke closed his eyes, remembering that night. The way Jessica had stayed unusually quiet during dinner. How Paul had kept his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that had seemed loving at the time. She made me promise not to tell you, Sarah continued. She said she could handle it, that she had a plan. I should have broken that promise, Luke. But she was so afraid, not just of Paul, but of what it would do to you, to the family. Why now? Luke asked, his voice rough. Why tell me this now? Sarah stopped pacing, turning to face him. Because I recognized the look in her eyes today when she came by the house after leaving your office. It's the same look my mother had, all those years living with my father. The look that says she's finally ready to break free, but she needs to know someone believes her. The weight of Sarah's words pressed against Luke's chest. His wife had never spoken about her childhood, about witnessing her mother's abuse. He'd known there were shadows there, but she'd kept that pain carefully locked away. Luke pulled out his phone, scrolling through the evidence Paul had presented. The loving texts, the financial records, the carefully constructed narrative of a manipulative wife plotting against her successful husband. Paul showed me documents, he said. Evidence that Jessica's been planning this, targeting his company. Of course she has, Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. Do you think women in these situations just walk away empty-handed? She needed resources, security. She needed leverage to ensure her safety. Every loving text, every perfect photo, it's survival, Luke. I watched my mother play the same role for years. Luke remembered the domestic violence cases he'd handled early in his career. The patterns he'd learned to recognize, victims maintaining a facade of normalcy, documenting abuse while pretending everything was fine, carefully planning their escape. His phone buzzed with a text from one of his investigators. The timestamps on Jessica's medical records matched with gaps in Paul's travel schedule. The Singapore alibi had holes, private jets making unscheduled returns, nights unaccounted for. I've been such a fool, Luke whispered, the truth settling into his bones. All these years, I never saw it. You saw what Paul wanted you to see, Sarah said gently. What Jessica needed you to see, until she was ready. That's how abuse works, it thrives in shadows, in doubt, in the space between what we want to believe and what we fear might be true. Luke stood abruptly, grabbing his keys. I need to talk to her. Now. Luke, wait. Sarah caught his arm. There's something else. The night of the Christmas party, after I found her in the bathroom, Jessica showed me a letter she'd written, documenting everything. She gave me a copy for safekeeping. Said if anything ever happened to her. Sarah disappeared into her home office, returning with a sealed envelope. Inside was Jessica's careful handwriting, pages of detailed accounts spanning years. Dates, incidents, witnesses. Names of household staff who'd been quietly paid off. Security cameras that had mysteriously malfunctioned. As Luke read, his legal mind began connecting dots he should have seen years ago. The turnover rate among their household staff. The way Paul insisted on handling all their technology, phones, computers, security systems. The business trips that coincided with Jessica's unexplained absences from family events. His phone buzzed again, another text, this time from Paul, "Talk to Jessica. She's agreed to meet. Come to the house tonight. We can sort this out like family." Luke showed the message to Sarah, whose face went pale. "Luke, when I saw Jessica today, she said she'd never speak to Paul alone again. She was clear about that." The implication hit him like a physical blow. If Jessica hadn't agreed to any meeting. "Call her," Sarah urged, already reaching for her own phone. "Call her right now." Luke's hands shook as he dialed his sister's number. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Then Jessica's voicemail, her cheerful greeting a chilling contrast to the fear rising in his throat. Sarah looked up from her phone, eyes wide. The security app shows her car at their house. "But Luke, she promised she wouldn't go back there. She promised." The rain-slicked streets reflected emergency lights as Luke's car sped through the darkness. Each passing minute stretched like hours, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah's voice came through the car's speakers, steady despite the fear threading through her words. "Police are 10 minutes out," she reported. "I've contacted Jessica's neighbor Susan, the retired nurse. She says Jessica came by 2 hours ago to drop off important documents. Said it was just in case. Just in case." The words echoed in Luke's mind as he turned onto the tree-lined avenue leading to Paul and Jessica's estate. How many, just-in-case, plans had his sister made over the years? How many escape routes had she memorized? How many safety nets had she carefully woven while maintaining a perfect smile for the world? The security gate was open, unusual for this time of night. Luke's headlights swept across the manicured lawn, catching movement near the greenhouse where Jessica tended her prized orchids. A shadow passed behind frosted glass, then disappeared. "I'm here," he told Sarah, killing the engine. "Stay on the line." The grand house loomed before him, windows gleaming like wet eyes in the darkness. Music drifted from within, classical, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Paul's favorite. Luke approached the front door, his footsteps masked by the gentle piano notes. Before he could reach for the handle, it swung open. Paul stood in the warmly lit foyer, sleeve cuffs unbuttoned, tie loosened, casual, as if this were any other evening among friends. "Luke," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come in. Jessica's just making tea." The familiar scent of Jessica's favorite Earl Grey filled the air, mixing with something sharper, cleaning products, perhaps. Luke's gaze swept the immaculate foyer, noting details with practiced precision. A damp spot on the Persian rug. A vase slightly out of alignment on its pedestal. Small disruptions in the usual perfect order. "Where is she, Paul?" "In the kitchen, like I said." Paul gestured toward the back of the house. "We've been talking, working things out. You'll see, this whole ugly situation, it's just a misunderstanding." Luke moved past him, every sense alert. The kitchen light spilled into the hallway, bright and harsh. Jessica stood at the counter, her back turned, measuring tea leaves into the silver infuser their grandmother had given her as a wedding gift. "Jess." Luke's voice was gentle, the way he used to call her when they were children and she had nightmares. She turned, and Luke's heart stopped. Her movements were too precise, too controlled. Her makeup, freshly applied, couldn't quite hide the redness around her eyes. Her hands, usually so steady with her beloved tea ritual, trembled slightly. "It's fine," she said, her voice distant. "Everything's fine now. We're working it out." Behind him, Paul's footsteps approached. "See? I told you. Just a rough patch, like any marriage." Luke noticed the way Jessica's shoulders tensed at Paul's voice, the almost imperceptible step she took toward the knife block on the counter. Her left hand drifted to her jacket pocket, where something rectangular made a slight bulge, her phone, recording. "The police will be here soon," Luke said quietly, watching both of them. "Whatever's happening here, it stops now." Paul's laugh was sharp. "Police? Come on, Luke. We're family. We don't need outsiders in our private matters." "Private," Jessica whispered, then louder, "like the private medical records you altered? The security footage you deleted? The staff you paid to forget what they saw?" "Jess," Paul's voice took on a warning tone. "We agreed not to dwell on the past." "No," she turned fully now, strength flowing into her voice. "You threatened the past. There's a difference." Luke shifted, placing himself between them as Paul took a step forward. In the distance, sirens began to wail. "You really want to do this?" Paul's facade cracked, rage seeping through. "You want to destroy everything? Fine. But remember, I'm not the only one with secrets." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a phone. "Remember that night in Aspen? The real reason your first IPO failed? The things you did to close the Morgan deal?" His fingers flew across the screen. One click, and every reporter in the city gets proof of who Jessica Mitchell really is. Jessica's laugh was quiet, almost peaceful. "Do it. I've spent years protecting your lies, Paul. I'm done. The truth is the truth, even the ugly parts. Even the parts that shame me. I'd rather live with that than spend one more day living in fear." The sirens grew closer. Paul's finger hovered over his phone. And in that moment, Luke saw his sister, truly saw her, for the first time in years. Behind the fear and fatigue was something unbreakable, a core of steel that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Then everything happened at once. A crash from upstairs. Paul spinning toward the sound. Jessica's hand flying to her pocket. Luke's phone buzzing with an urgent message from Sarah. And through it all, Beethoven played on, the haunting notes of the Moonlight Sonata echoing through the house like a morning bell. The crash upstairs had come from Jessica's private study, a room Paul had never been able to breach, though not for lack of trying. As police sirens grew closer, Luke watched understanding dawn in Paul's eyes. All those years, Jessica had been gathering evidence, building her case piece by piece, preparing for this moment with a patience born of necessity. "It's over," Jessica said softly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "The household staff you paid off. They kept copies of everything. Every threat, every accident, every manipulated security recording. They've been working with me, waiting for the right moment." Paul's composure shattered. "You turned my own people against me?" "No," Jessica replied, taking a careful step backward. "They chose to help because they saw the truth. Martha, who cleaned blood from the carpet and told no one. James, who heard the screams and kept silent out of fear for his family. Even Richards, your most trusted security guard, he's the one who helped me set up the hidden cameras." Luke moved closer to his sister, noting how she stood straighter now, as if shedding a weight she'd carried for years. In her eyes, he saw not just fear, but determination. Not just pain, but purpose. "The night Sarah found me at the Christmas party," Jessica continued, her words measured and clear, "I realized I couldn't keep protecting your image at the cost of my soul. But I knew leaving wouldn't be enough. You'd find me, charm everyone into believing your version of events, like you always did. So I started planning." Blue and red lights flooded the kitchen windows. Paul lunged for his phone, but Jessica was faster. She pressed a button on her own device, and suddenly Paul's phone went dark. "Richards disabled your remote access an hour ago," she explained. "Everything you thought you could use against me. It's been transferred to secure servers. Your threats are as empty as your promises ever were." The front door burst open, officers flooding in with practiced efficiency. Paul's rage transformed into something more dangerous, desperation. He moved toward Jessica with violent intent, but Luke was there, years of brotherly protection crystallizing into one decisive moment. As the police led Paul away, Luke noticed something remarkable. Jessica wasn't watching her husband's departure. Instead, she moved through the kitchen with deliberate steps, gathering her grandmother's tea set with gentle hands. "This is all I want from here," she said quietly. "The rest, it was never really mine anyway. Just props in someone else's play." Sarah arrived moments later, enveloping Jessica in a fierce embrace. The two women held each other, years of shared secrets and silent support flowing between them. Luke watched, understanding finally how much strength it had taken for both of them to carry this burden, Sarah honoring her promise while putting safeguards in place, Jessica orchestrating her liberation with painstaking care. Hours later, as dawn began to paint the sky in gentle pinks and golds, they sat in Luke and Sarah's kitchen. Jessica cradled a cup of tea made in her grandmother's silver pot, its familiar warmth a touchstone of continuity in a world turned upside down. "I need to tell you something," she said to Luke, her voice threaded with both exhaustion and relief. "About why I chose this moment, why I needed you to be part of it." She reached into her bag, withdrawing a worn leather journal. "I started writing letters to you, the day after the first time he hurt me. Everything I couldn't say, everything I was afraid to admit. I thought if anything happened to me, at least you'd know the truth." Luke's hands shook as he accepted the journal. "Jess, let me finish," she said gently. "I kept writing, even after I started planning my escape. But somewhere along the way, the letters changed. They weren't just about documenting the truth anymore. They became my way of holding on to who I really was, the sister you knew, the woman who existed before all this. Writing to you helped me remember that I was more than what was happening to me." Sarah quietly left the room, understanding this moment needed to be just between siblings. Through the window, they could see the first rays of sunlight touching the garden where they had played as children, where Jessica had taught Luke's son to plant sunflowers, where countless family moments had unfolded in happier times. "When I finally decided to file for divorce," Jessica continued, "I knew it had to be you representing me. Not just because you're the best lawyer I know, but because I needed you to see all of it, the darkness and the light, the weakness and the strength. I needed my brother back." Luke opened the journal with reverent care, his sister's familiar handwriting blurring through his tears. The first entry began simply, "Dear Luke, today I realized that surviving isn't enough. I need to live again." 6 months after that dawn revelation in Luke's kitchen, the Harrison siblings sat together on a weathered bench in their mother's garden. The autumn air carried the scent of late-blooming roses, their mother's favorite, now tenderly maintained by Jessica. She reached out to touch a velvet petal, her movements free of the hesitation that had marked them for so long. "The preliminary hearing is tomorrow," Luke said softly, watching his sister's face for signs of distress. The legal battle had been grueling, each revelation more challenging than the last. Paul's defense team had tried every tactic, painting Jessica as manipulative, unstable, greedy. But with each attack, she had grown stronger, her truth more unshakable. "I'm ready," Jessica replied, her voice carrying a quiet certainty that still surprised him. "Sarah helped me choose my outfit. Professional but not too formal. Approachable but strong." She smiled slightly. "We spent hours talking about what strength looks like in a courtroom. How to let the jury see both my vulnerability and my resilience." Luke thought about the previous week's preparation sessions, how Jessica had transformed their mother's sunroom into a mock courtroom. She had insisted on practicing her testimony there, surrounded by echoes of childhood memories and their mother's enduring presence in every blooming flower. "Did I ever tell you about the orchid?" Jessica asked suddenly, turning to face him. "The one in Paul's greenhouse that night?" Luke shook his head, remembering the shadow he'd seen moving behind frosted glass. "It was dying," she continued. "Paul had overwatered it, trying to force it to bloom out of season. But orchids can't be rushed or controlled. They bloom when they're ready, when conditions are right. Her fingers traced the spine of the journal in her lap. That night, I went to rescue it. Even with everything else happening, I couldn't leave it there to suffer. She reached into her bag, withdrawing a small photo. The rescued orchid now thrived in her new apartment, its delicate purple blooms a testament to patience and proper care. The prosecutor wants to use the greenhouse security footage, Luke said carefully. She says it shows premeditation, how you maintained calm even in crisis, methodically gathering what mattered while ensuring your safety. Jessica nodded. Use it. Let them see everything. The careful planning, the strategic decisions, the moments of fear and doubt. Let them see how survival doesn't always look like running away. Sometimes it looks like staying put, gathering strength, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes it looks like saving an orchid while your world falls apart. From inside the house came the sound of laughter. Sarah was teaching Luke's son how to bake their grandmother's famous apple pie, a recipe that had skipped a generation but was finding its way home. The familiar scent of cinnamon and butter wafted through the open windows. I've been thinking about what happens after, Jessica said, her voice thoughtful. After the trial, after the divorce is final, after all the legal dust settles. Everyone keeps asking about my plans, expecting some grand gesture of liberation. She stood, moving to tend a wilting rose with practiced hands. But I think healing is in the small moments. It's in choosing what tea to drink without wondering if anyone will approve. It's in wearing bright colors again, in laughing too loud, in letting my garden grow wild instead of manicured. It's in teaching my nieces and nephews that love should lift you up, never tear you down. Luke watched his sister work, her movements sure and peaceful. She had always been the family gardener, nurturing things back to health, coaxing beauty from neglect. Now he understood it wasn't just a hobby, it had been practice for her own renewal. The foundation board meets next week, she continued, pruning dead leaves with precise snips. We're finalizing the shelter expansion plans. 3 new locations, with dedicated legal support services. She glanced at him. They need volunteer attorneys. Count me in, Luke replied without hesitation. Sarah too, she's already designing trauma-informed spaces for the children's areas. Jessica's smile reached her eyes, something that had once been rare but was becoming wonderfully common. We're building something good from all this. Something that matters. In the kitchen, the timer chimed. Soon they would gather around the familiar table, sharing pie and stories, building new memories to overlay the painful ones. Their family had been transformed by trauma but not defined by it, strengthened by truth rather than broken by it. It's time, Jessica said, gathering her gardening tools with practiced care. But before heading inside, she paused, looking back at the garden their mother had planted so long ago. You know what Mom used to say about roses? That their thorns weren't weapons, but protection. Nature's way of teaching us that beauty and strength often grow from the same stem. Luke stood, offering his arm to his sister. Together, they walked toward the warmth of their waiting family, leaving the autumn garden to its quiet work of renewal and growth.